Gulf Wars were one of the major conflicts that the world had to face. There were basically two types of wars. The first being the Iran and Iraq War, and the second being the Persian Gulf War. The man beneath the wars was the man himself, Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein caused both wars to happen, but all because of one reason: oil. Saddam's greed for oil was so high that he caused wars. But let's talk about the Iran-Iraq War. The Iran-Iraq War was a devastating conflict that lasted from 1980 to 1988 between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Republic of Iraq. It was one of the longest and bloodiest wars of the 20th century, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians on both sides. The war was primarily caused by a dispute over the Shatt al-Arab, a waterway that formed part of the border between the two countries. Iraq claimed full control over the waterway, while Iran insisted on shared sovereignty. Additionally, the political and ideological differences between the two regimes, as well as personal ambitions of their leaders, contributed to the outbreak of the conflict. The war was marked by intense ground battles, aerial bombardments, and the use of chemical weapons. Both sides suffered heavy losses, and the conflict had a devastating impact on the economies and infrastructure of both countries. The war finally ended in 1988 with a ceasefire brokered by the United Nations. However, the conflict left a lasting legacy of bitterness and distrust between the two nations. One of the key factors that contributed to the war was the ideological clash between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Ba'athist regime in Iraq. Iran, under the leadership of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, embraced a revolutionary Islamic ideology that challenged the regional status quo. Iraq, on the other hand, was governed by Saddam Hussein, a secular dictator who sought to maintain his grip on power. The ideological differences between the two countries created a tense atmosphere and fueled mutual distrust. Another factor that exacerbated the conflict was the personal ambitions of the leaders of both countries. Saddam Hussein, fearing the spread of Iranian influence in the region, saw the war as an opportunity to weaken his rival. Ayatollah Khomeini, on the other hand, believed that it was his duty to support Shia Muslims in Iraq and challenge the secular regimes of the region. Millions of people were displaced, and entire cities were reduced to rubble. One of the most enduring legacies of the war is the human cost. The conflict resulted in the deaths of an estimated 500,000 to 1 million soldiers and civilians on both sides. Millions of people were forced to flee their homes, creating a massive refugee crisis. The Iran-Iraq War also highlights the role of external powers in regional conflicts. The United States, the Soviet Union, and other countries provided military and economic support to both sides, exacerbating the conflict and making it more difficult to resolve. In conclusion, the Iran-Iraq War was a tragic conflict that had a devastating impact on both nations involved. The war offers valuable lessons about the importance of diplomacy, restraint, and international cooperation in resolving regional conflicts. By understanding the causes and consequences of the war, we can work to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. Iraq's plan for the Second or Persian Gulf War was based on Kuwait and its vast oil reserves. Neither Iran nor Iraq was recognized as the victor of the Iran-Iraq War by the United Nations. The war ended in a stalemate in 1988 when both countries agreed to a ceasefire. Iran's primary goal was to defend Khuzestan, which it achieved. However, it failed to oust the Iraqi Ba'ath Party from power, which was its secondary goal. Iraq's overarching goal was to establish itself as the most powerful country in the Arab world. However, it failed to conquer Khuzestan and the Shatt al-Arab River. The Persian Gulf War, when compared to the Iran-Iraq War, was much smaller, of 1 year, which was more dangerous than the Iran-Iraq War. So let's talk about the Persian Gulf War. The Persian Gulf War, also known as the Second Gulf War, was a conflict that began in 1990 and lasted until 1991. It was triggered by Iraq's invasion and occupation of Kuwait on August 2, 1990. The war began with Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, a small neighboring country. Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein aimed to gain control of Kuwait's vast oil reserves and eliminate its debt to Iran for the Iran-Iraq War. The invasion was met with widespread international condemnation and led to the formation of a coalition of 35 countries led by the United States. The war officially began on January 17, 1991, with a massive air offensive launched by the coalition forces against Iraqi military targets. The war resulted in significant damage to both human life and infrastructure. The exact number of casualties is disputed, but estimates range from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. The war also caused extensive damage to Kuwait's oil infrastructure, leading to massive oil spills and environmental damage. Operation Desert Storm was the code name for the military campaign launched by the coalition forces to expel Iraqi forces from Kuwait. The air campaign involved intense bombing of Iraqi military targets, including airfields, command centers, and missile sites. After 6 weeks of heavy bombing, ground forces launched a massive offensive that quickly overwhelmed the Iraqi army, forcing them to retreat from Kuwait. During the war, Iraq launched Scud missiles at Israel and Saudi Arabia. These missiles were inaccurate and caused limited damage, but they instilled fear in the civilian population. The coalition forces responded by deploying Patriot missile defense systems to intercept the Scud missiles. The Persian Gulf War had a significant impact on the Middle East and the world. It demonstrated the power of international cooperation and the effectiveness of military force in achieving political objectives. However, the war also raised concerns about the use of force and the long-term consequences of military intervention. The Persian Gulf War ended on February 28, 1991, with a decisive victory for the coalition forces. After weeks of intense aerial bombardment, the coalition forces launched a ground offensive on February 24, 1991. This ground assault was swift and overwhelming, catching the Iraqi forces by surprise. Faced with the overwhelming might of the coalition forces, the Iraqi army was forced to retreat from Kuwait. The Iraqi forces suffered heavy casualties and were disorganized and demoralized. On February 28, 1991, a ceasefire was declared, effectively ending the war. Iraq was forced to accept the terms of the ceasefire, which included withdrawing from Kuwait and accepting UN inspections of its weapons programs. The coalition forces consisted of 6 main members of the coalition. Those are as followed: United States of America, United Kingdom, France, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, which was occupied by Iraq. Some of the major key figures in the Persian Gulf War were President George Bush of America. He commenced and created the coalition to stop Iraq from fully invading Kuwait. King Fahd of Saudi Arabia. King Fahd, in an unprecedented move, invited Western and Arab forces to deploy in the kingdom in support of the Saudi Defense Forces. The U.S. immediately dispatched elements of its rapid deployment force due to him. Hosni Mubarak, Egypt's former president Hosni Mubarak, made his country a central coalition member during the 1991 Gulf War. Egyptian infantry were among the first to land in Saudi Arabia, to remove Iraqi forces from Kuwait. After the war, the United States, Gulf states, and Europe pardoned Egypt's approximately $20 billion of debt. The major economical effect was on the Kuwaiti dinar, the currency which, on estimate, is equal to somewhat between 3 United States dollars in today's market, was at its peak lowest during the Persian Gulf War. This caused a huge economical effect on Kuwait and its people. After the Persian Gulf War, many people were talking about their experiences in the Persian Gulf War, including the reason of the Persian Gulf War, which Saddam Hussein told about.
Experience. One moment I was patrolling along looking for Iraqi vehicles in what we call the mother of all retreats. Looking over the side, searching for a target.
أيضا نحن لو نسأل
If we ask international public opinion in general, was it legal for this part of Iraq to have been severed from Iraq in 1913? Was it in accordance with the law?
After that, he was removed from power in 2003 for crimes against humanity, which included the Dujail massacre, where almost 148 Shia Muslims were killed, and for the Halabja killing in the state of Kurdistan, Iraq. After that, he was charged for these cases in court in 2005. After the trial ending in 2006, the Iraqi government gave the order of death by hanging to Saddam Hussein. And on the 30th of September 2006, Saddam Hussein was hanged in the Camp Justice near Baghdad. After Saddam Hussein was overthrown, Jalal Talabani became the president of Iraq, and the dream Iran had to overthrow the Ba'athist Party came true. Some people were very happy of this change, and some thought that he was a good president. Another reason Saddam Hussein was overthrown was due to the recent 9/11 incident which occurred in New York. The United States thought that Iraq was supporting the Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. These two Gulf Wars played a significant impact on the Arabian Peninsula and how Iraq was fighting them to capture the main oil points of these countries, like Khuzestan, Iran, and Kuwait.